I never thought buying my first home would lead to a family war. After years of saving every penny from multiple jobs, I finally had enough for a down payment on a modest house in a nice neighborhood. The pride I felt receiving those keys was overwhelming. Then came the certified letter. My parents were suing me for ownership of my new house, claiming it rightfully belonged to my sister Jessica. Without funds for an attorney, I decided to defend myself. If you are watching this video, let me know where you are tuning in from. Hit that like and subscribe button, and stay to hear how standing up for myself changed everything. I grew up as the oldest child in our family of 4 in suburban Denver. From my earliest memories, my parents made it clear Jessica was the golden child. While she received new clothes, music lessons, and constant praise, I wore hand-me-downs and heard endless criticism. My academic achievements were dismissed as expected, while her passing grades earned lavish rewards. When college applications arrived, my parents sat me down for a serious talk. "Damien, we need to be realistic about Jessica's future," my father Robert explained, tapping his fingers on our kitchen table. "She will need financial support for her education and beyond. We expect you to make your own way." I nodded, having expected nothing different. That summer after graduation, I moved out with exactly 2 suitcases and $300 saved from my part-time job at the local hardware store. I found an apartment with 3 roommates enrolled in community college and worked nights stocking shelves at a grocery store. After 2 years, I transferred to a state university, taking out student loans to cover tuition. My phone rarely rang with calls from home. On holidays, visits were brief and uncomfortable, with conversations revolving around Jessica's accomplishments. I graduated with a computer science degree and immediately started at a small IT company with a modest salary. Financial independence became my obsession. I lived in a tiny studio apartment, brought lunch from home, and picked up freelance coding projects on weekends. Every payday, I transferred money into a house fund account, watching it grow slowly but steadily. For 6 years, I maintained this discipline, gradually climbing to better positions and higher salaries. When my account finally showed enough for a down payment, I began my house hunt. After months of searching, I found it a 3-bedroom craftsman in a quiet neighborhood with good schools nearby. The inspection revealed some needed updates, but the structure was solid. When the seller accepted my offer, I nearly cried from relief and joy. On moving day, standing alone in my empty living room, I felt accomplished in a way I never had before. This was mine, earned through my own sweat and determination. After settling in over the next month, I decided to attempt reconciliation with my family. Perhaps my new stability could improve our relationship. I invited them for dinner, spending hours cleaning and preparing a special meal. When they arrived, my mother Sarah immediately commented on the neighborhood. "This area is becoming quite desirable. The houses here are selling for a fortune." Now, she observed, running her finger along my countertop. My father circled the living room slowly. "This must have cost a pretty penny. How exactly did you afford this, Damien?" 6 years of saving, Dad. "I put aside money from every paycheck and lived below my means," I explained, trying to hide my disappointment at their reaction. Jessica wandered through the rooms, unusually quiet. As we ate dinner, the conversation was strained, with pointed questions about my mortgage terms and property taxes. They left early, declining dessert with vague promises to visit again soon. 3 weeks later, the certified letter arrived. Standing in my driveway, I tore open the envelope and felt the ground shift beneath my feet. My parents were suing me, claiming I had used family funds intended for Jessica to purchase my house. The court date was set for preliminary hearing in 30 days. The document trembled in my hands as I read their accusation that I had misappropriated family resources intended for Jessica's first home purchase. They demanded the deed be transferred to her name. A cold wave of shock and betrayal washed over me. I called a few attorneys, but the retainer fees were far beyond my budget after the house purchase. After a sleepless night weighing my options, I made a decision I would represent myself in court. The truth was on my side, and I would make sure it was heard. The following weekend, I drove to the public library and found every book on property law and civil court procedures I could carry. The librarian, noticing my overwhelmed expression, directed me to online resources for self-represented litigants. I spent hours taking notes, learning legal terminology, and understanding what evidence would be admissible. Back home, I created a detailed spreadsheet of my finances dating back 6 years. Every paycheck, every transfer to my savings account, every withdrawal for the down payment, all meticulously documented. I gathered tax returns showing my income sources' bank statements, proving the origin of my house funds and employment records, confirming my salary history. My phone rang on Tuesday evening. It was my Uncle Thomas, my father's older brother. "Damien, I heard about what Robert and Sarah are doing," he said, his voice heavy with concern. "I want you to know I think it is wrong." "Thanks, Uncle Thomas," I replied, surprised and grateful for the support. "This is not the first time they have shown this favoritism," he continued. "I remember when your grandfather left you his watch in his will. Your father somehow convinced the executor that Jessica should have it converted to a bracelet. This revelation unlocked a flood of memories, patterns of favoritism I had normalized throughout my childhood. We talked for over an hour, with Thomas offering to testify about the family dynamics if needed. The next day, my coworker Steve approached my desk. "Man, I heard about your situation from Alex," he said quietly. "That is messed up. If you need someone to vouch for all those late nights and weekend work you put in to save for that house, I am there." His offer touched me deeply. As word spread among my friends, offers of support poured in. My neighbor Julia, a paralegal, spent an evening helping me organize my evidence into a compelling narrative. Despite this support, I still hoped to resolve things without a court battle. I called my parents repeatedly, each call going to voicemail. I spent hours taking notes, learning legal terminology, and understanding what evidence would be admissible. Back home, I created a detailed spreadsheet of my finances dating back 6 years. Every paycheck, every transfer to my savings account, every withdrawal for the down payment, all meticulously documented. I gathered tax returns showing my income sources' bank statements, proving the origin of my house funds and employment records, confirming my salary history. "That is simply not true," my father interrupted. "We have supported you in countless ways, and you promised to help your sister establish herself." Jessica nodded. "You always said family helps family, Damien. Now you have this big house all to yourself, while I am stuck in that tiny apartment." I shook my head in disbelief. I never promised anyone my house. "When exactly did I make this commitment?" They exchanged glances, but offered no specific answer. As our uncomfortable lunch continued, I noticed Jessica texting frequently under the table, her expression calculating rather than hurt. When she excused herself to the restroom, I glimpsed a text on her screen about getting the house listed quickly. This was not about a place to live. It was about money. The preliminary hearing arrived on a rainy Tuesday morning. I arrived early, dressed in my best suit, carrying a folder of organized evidence. The courtroom was smaller than I expected, with worn wooden benches and fluorescent lighting. My parents entered with a silver-haired man in an expensive suit, who I soon learned was Brian Walters, their attorney. Judge Martha Reynolds, a stern woman in her 60s, called the court to order. After introductions, she asked the plaintiffs to present their case. "Your Honor," Walters began smoothly, "this is a straightforward matter of family understanding and implied trust. The defendants, Robert and Sarah, maintained a family fund intended to help both their children purchase their first homes. The plaintiff, Damien, accessed these resources prematurely and against family agreement, purchasing a property that was intended to benefit his sister Jessica. When my turn came, I stood on shaky legs. "Your Honor, no such family fund ever existed. I purchased my home using savings from my own income, which I can document completely. I have had no financial support from my parents since I was 18 years old. Judge Reynolds listened attentively, then scheduled our full hearing for 3 weeks later. As we left the courtroom, my mother attempted to speak to me, but my father pulled her away, whispering something that made her face harden. 2 days later, I received a text from Amanda, who had been Jessica's friend in high school before they had a falling out. "I think you should know what is really going on," her message read. "Jessica has been talking about selling your house immediately if she gets it. She says they need cash quick. We met for coffee, and Amanda explained that she had overheard Jessica discussing the situation with another friend. According to what she heard, my father had accumulated substantial gambling debts that had recently come due. They needed a quick source of funds, and my house represented a solution. Suspicious, but needing verification, I did some research. Through public records, I discovered my parents had taken a second mortgage on their home 6 months earlier. I also found a lien against my father's business filed by a company called Desert Vista Investments, known locally as a front for less than legitimate lending operations. The pieces were falling into place, and they revealed a picture far more disturbing than I had imagined. The week before the trial, I barely slept. Each night, I reviewed my evidence, practiced my arguments, and prepared questions for cross-examination. I stood before my bathroom mirror, rehearsing until my delivery became confident and clear. My friend Carlos, a business analyst, played devil's advocate, challenging my claims and helping me strengthen my case. The night before court, I sat alone in my living room, looking around at the home I had worked so hard to obtain. The thought of losing it made my stomach clench, but beneath the fear ran a current of determination. I would not be victimized by my own family. The courtroom felt different the second time. The same wood paneling and fluorescent lights, but now the space seemed to hum with tension. My parents and Jessica sat behind their attorney, occasionally glancing in my direction, with expressions ranging from anger to smugness. Judge Reynolds called the court to order promptly at 9, and Attorney Walters presented his opening statement. "Your Honor, this case centers on a family understanding that existed for many years." He began, his voice resonant and practiced. "Robert and Sarah raised their children with the explicit agreement that family resources would be shared equitably. They established funds for both children's futures with the understanding that Damien, as the elder sibling with a head start in life, would allow his sister the benefit of family support for her first home purchase." He continued, describing an elaborate, unwritten agreement that had never existed. According to Walters, I had acknowledged this arrangement many times over the years. In purchasing this property using family resources, Damien violated not just a financial arrangement, but a sacred family trust, he concluded dramatically. When my turn came, I approached the podium with calm I did not entirely feel. "Your Honor, what you have just heard is a complete fiction," I began. "There was never any family fund, no agreement about home purchases, and certainly no resources provided to me. I left home at 18 and have been financially independent ever since." I explained my journey from community college student working nights to IT professional saving diligently for years. I presented my bank statements, tax returns, and employment records in chronological order. Every dollar that went into my home came from my earned income, documented here in these records, I explained, submitting my evidence. There was never any contribution from my parents, nor any agreement regarding my sister. My mother, Sarah, was the first to testify. Dressed conservatively with a pearl necklace I had never seen before, she spoke of family discussions around the dinner table about helping Jessica establish herself. "Damien always knew we had set aside resources for both children," she testified. "He agreed Jessica would need more support given his advantages." When I cross-examined her, I asked, "Can you provide any documentation of this family fund you mention? Bank statements, trust documents, even written notes about its existence?" she faltered. It was an understanding, not something we wrote down. And can you identify any specific amount you contributed to my education or housing at any point after I turned 18? We helped in many ways that might not show on paper, she replied vaguely. My father took the stand next, claiming he had given me cash gifts over the years, totaling over $20,000. Why would you give such large sums in cash rather than checks or transfers? I asked during cross-examination. I preferred to handle family matters privately, he answered, not meeting my eyes. And do you have any receipts, notes, or text messages acknowledging these gifts? No, it was understood between us, he replied, his jaw tightening. Is it not true that you recently took a second mortgage on your home? I asked. Objection, Walters interrupted. Relevance, I believe. It speaks to motivation. Your Honor, I responded. Judge Reynolds considered briefly. I will allow it. Please answer the question. My father shifted uncomfortably. Yes, but that has nothing to do with this case. The real drama began when Jessica took the stand. With tearful eyes, she described how I had supposedly promised to help her buy her first home. Damien always said he would make sure I had a nice place to live, she claimed. He knew how much I wanted to live in that exact neighborhood, and he bought that house knowing it was perfect for me. During cross-examination, I pulled out my phone. Jessica, I have text messages from you dated 3 years ago where you specifically said you wanted to live downtown in a condo, not in a residential neighborhood. Would you like to explain the discrepancy? Her expression flickered. My preferences changed. I also have a message where you state, and I quote, I know Mom and Dad never saved anything for either of us, but at least you got out early. Do you recall? Sending that, Jessica glanced at our parents, clearly flustered. I do not remember that. I submitted the text message records, watching the judge review them with interest. Then came my moment to change everything. I presented the evidence of my father's gambling debts, including public records of the lien against his business from Desert Vista Investments. Your Honor, I recently discovered that my father owes substantial sums to known loan sharks, I explained. I also have evidence suggesting the real plan was never for my sister to live in my house, but to sell it immediately. I presented screenshots Amanda had provided of Jessica discussing the sale plans. Walters objected vigorously, but Judge Reynolds allowed the evidence when I demonstrated chain of custody and authentication. Mr. and Mrs. Wright, Judge Reynolds addressed my parents directly. Is it accurate that you are in financial distress due to gambling debts? The silence in the courtroom was deafening. My father's face had turned ashen. We have had some financial challenges, he finally admitted. And was there a plan to sell this property quickly if it were transferred to Jessica's name? My mother looked at the floor. My father's jaw worked silently for a moment before he spoke. We needed to consolidate our assets during this temporary setback, he conceded. Judge Reynolds removed her glasses, her expression stern. So the true intention was never for Jessica to live in the house, but to liquidate it for cash. The case unraveled from there. After a brief recess, Judge Reynolds returned with her ruling. Based on the evidence presented, I find no merit in the plaintiff's claim, she announced. The defendant has thoroughly documented the legitimate source of funds used to purchase the property in question. Furthermore, I find disturbing evidence of an attempt to manipulate this court for financial gain. She looked directly at my parents and Jessica. This court is not a tool to resolve personal financial problems through deception. The case is dismissed with prejudice, and ownership of the property is confirmed to remain with Damien Wright. As the gavel fell, I felt 6 months of tension release from my shoulders. My parents and Jessica stormed out without looking at me. I stood alone in the emptying courtroom, victorious but strangely hollow. The days following the trial brought a confusing mix of emotions. Relief washed over me in waves when I pulled into my driveway each evening knowing my home remained mine. Yet underneath lay a profound sadness. The family I had always hoped might someday value me had instead tried to take the one thing I had worked hardest to achieve. A week after the trial, Jessica sent a series of angry text messages accusing me of destroying the family. I did not respond, realizing no explanation would matter to someone who saw nothing wrong with what they had attempted to do. Uncle Thomas visited the following Sunday, bringing a homemade lasagna and much-needed perspective. "Your grandmother would be proud of you," he told me as we sat on my back porch. "She always said you had a quiet strength the others missed." He shared stories about my father's childhood patterns of entitlement that had been enabled and reinforced across generations. "Sometimes family trees need pruning for the healthiest growth," he said gently. "You may need to grow in a different direction now." His words gave me permission to do what I had been considering since the trial. I wrote a letter to my parents explaining that I needed time and space away from them. I did not attack or accuse, simply stated that trust had been broken and relationships needed boundaries. I blocked their numbers and social media accounts, creating space to heal. The house became my sanctuary and therapy. I painted each room choosing colors that brought me joy rather than worrying what others might think. I planted a small vegetable garden in the backyard, finding peace in nurturing growing things. The spare bedroom became a home office where I began freelancing beyond my day job, building additional security. 3 months after the trial, I found a therapist specializing in family trauma. Dr. Fortier Russell helped me understand the dynamics that had shaped our family and my place within it. Gradually, I stopped questioning what I had done to deserve such treatment and recognized that the deficiency had never been mine. Through therapy and new activities, I built connections with people who valued authenticity and reciprocity. My neighbor Julia invited me to a community garden project where I met other homeowners passionate about improving our neighborhood. My coworker Steve introduced me to his recreational basketball league, where Tuesday night games became a weekly highlight. Slowly, I created a chosen family built on mutual respect rather than obligation. At work, I channeled my energy into projects that had previously intimidated me, earning a promotion to senior systems analyst. The additional income went into home improvements and a robust emergency fund, reinforcing my self-reliance. 6 months after the trial, an unexpected letter arrived with my mother's handwriting on the envelope. Inside was a brief note asking if we could meet. After discussing it with Dr. Russell, I agreed to coffee at a neutral location. My mother looked older, the lines around her eyes deeper than I remembered. We exchanged awkward pleasantries before she spoke the words I never expected. "I am sorry, Damien. What we did was wrong." I sat in stunned silence as she explained that the gambling had been going on for years, creating a desperate financial situation. Jessica had suggested the lawsuit as a solution. "Your father still believes you owed us this," she admitted. "But I know now that was wrong." When I asked if she would have come forward with this had they won the case, her hesitation told me everything I needed to know. "I appreciate your apology," I said carefully, "but trust takes time to rebuild if it can be at all." We parted with no promises, but a fragile door left slightly open. Later, I learned from Uncle Thomas that my parents had sold their house and moved to a smaller place in Arizona. Jessica had followed, still financially dependent on what remained of their resources. A full year after moving in, I hosted a housewarming party I should have had months earlier. Friends, colleagues, neighbors, and Uncle Thomas filled my home with laughter and conversation. As I looked around at these people who had chosen to be in my life, I realized I had built something more valuable than a house. I had created a life of authenticity and self-respect. 2 weeks later, I encountered Jessica unexpectedly at the grocery store. She looked momentarily startled, then approached me hesitantly. "Your lawn looks nice," she said, an awkward peace offering. "Dad never could get grass to grow like that." We spoke briefly about neutral topics. As we parted, she paused. "I was wrong, about the house." It was not quite an apology, but perhaps the beginning of one. I nodded, not ready to forgive, but willing to acknowledge the moment. That night, sitting on my porch watching the sunset, I reflected on the journey. The lawsuit that had seemed like the worst betrayal had ultimately freed me from patterns that would have continued indefinitely. In fighting for my house, I had found my boundaries, my voice, and ultimately my peace. The foundation of my life was no longer built on seeking approval that would never come, but on the solid ground of self-worth I had constructed brick by brick. My home was truly mine, not just legally, but in every way that mattered. Have you ever had to stand up to family members who tried to take advantage of you? How did you handle maintaining boundaries while leaving room for possible reconciliation? Share your experiences in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please hit the like button and subscribe to hear more about navigating difficult family dynamics. And if you know someone struggling with similar challenges, share this video with them so they know they are not alone. Thank you for listening to my journey, and remember that sometimes the family we choose is more important than the family we are born into.